My name is Larry Terry, and I'm the Vice President for Outreach at Penn State University. It is my honor to introduce today's speaker, someone who has dedicated his life to tackling some of the most pressing and complex issues facing our society. Jared Fishman is the founder and executive director of the Justice Innovation Lab, an organization that's reimagining how justice and our justice system can work fairly, effectively, and for everyone. JIL helps communities improve public safety while reducing harmful outcomes, including unnecessary incarceration and unjust racial and economic disparities. This work is rooted in a simple yet powerful idea that meaningful change happens when we take a people-centered, data-informed approach to solving problems. Before launching JIL, Jared spent 14 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. Timely work there. There he led some of the nation's most high-profile prosecutions involving police misconduct, hate crimes, and human trafficking, cases that demanded courage, clarity, and an unwavering sense of justice. He's also author of the Fire on the Levee book, a powerful account of the murder of Henry Glover and the long road to justice after Hurricane Katrina, a story that reflects on Jared's commitment to truth, accountability, and human dignity. Today, as the co-director of JIL and adjunct faculty at George Washington University Law School, Jared continues to inspire the next generation of changemakers, sharing his experience and insight with students and professionals alike. In today's talk, titled, "What Does It Take to Save Our Communities?" Jared invites us to imagine a better future and to consider our role in creating it. He'll challenge us to think boldly, act bravely, and believe in the power of change. Please join me in welcoming Jared Fishman.
Thank you. Thank you. It is great to be here at Penn State. I was last here like 27 years ago as a college student. I was just visiting. My talk today is called "What Will It Take to Fix Our Communities or Save Our Communities?" I've gone back and forth between how desperate it feels like the times that we are in. I've settled with fix for today. I don't pretend to understand much about your community, as I have not spent any time here. But what I have seen traveling around the country is that communities across the political spectrum and all sorts of geographies are challenged by some of the biggest challenges of our time, whether that be affecting our economy or our health or our safety or just our general well-being. Now, I spent my career in broken places. I spent my career in places that were damaged by war, by natural disaster, by social unrest. And I hope my talk today will give you some insights that I've picked up over the last 25 years of what we can do to make our communities stronger, healthier, and more resilient. I want to start today in 2009. I was a rookie prosecutor at the Department of Justice when a thin brown file came across my desk. In that file were two items. One was the autopsy of a man named Henry Glover. His body was found burned behind a levee in New Orleans in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. The other item was an article written by an investigative journalist who tried to lay out what little was known about Henry's last day. And though there was much that was uncertain, one thing was clear. Henry Glover had last been seen in the custody of the New Orleans Police Department. Now, the file landed on my desk because I was a prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and our office investigated hate crimes and human trafficking. But our office was also responsible for investigating allegations of police misconduct. And the rumor that was going around New Orleans was that Henry Glover had been killed by the police and his body burned by police officers. They sent me down to New Orleans to figure out whether or not this was true. So before I tell you a little bit more about how we came to solve the mystery of the fire on the levee, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I got there and why I was assigned this case. If you would have asked me when I was young what I wanted to be when I grow up, I would have told you I wanted to be a firefighter. Now, has anyone ever been asked this question? What do you want to be when you grow up? Anyone? Has anyone been asked that question recently? Has anyone asked other people this question recently? This is a terrible question. We should stop asking people this question. I think the question that we need to be asking people is, who do you want to be when you grow up? Because I think when we frame our conversations this way, what kind of person do you want to be when you grow up? And I will say that we should not just reserve this for children. Because what I have learned, particularly over the last 25 years, is that I still have a lot of growing up to do, as I imagine many of you do. And when we frame the question this way, I think it actually makes it easier for us to figure out what exactly will we do for work. So if you asked me what I wanted to be, I would have told you a firefighter. You see, when I was 3 years old, my house caught on fire. And the firefighters were the ones who came to our house to help us. So if you asked me what I wanted to be, I would have told you a firefighter. But if you would have asked me who I wanted to be, I would have told you I wanted to be the kind of person who helped people when they were in trouble. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the second generation American. My grandparents, that's Grandma Frida and Grandpa Harry, they fled Nazi-controlled Europe in 1938 before the Nazis destroyed their entire community. Deeply ingrained in my education growing up was a Jewish concept known as tikkun olam, which says the world is broken and that we all have an obligation to fix it. I was a bit of an overachiever back in those days, so I decided to seek out the most broken places destroyed by war. If you would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have told you I wanted to be an ambassador. If you asked me who I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have told you I wanted to be the kind of person who brings people together. So when I was in college, I got a job at a great organization called Seeds of Peace. It was a summer camp that brought together teenagers from conflict zones, from the Middle East, from the Balkans, from North and South Cyprus, from India and Pakistan. We would bring together teenagers who had been at war, with this idea that if we could bring people together, perhaps we could identify the solutions. Now, I'll set the scene. It's 1998. I'm in rural Maine at a beautiful, idyllic summer camp set by a lake. Much like very many American summer camps, we played capture the flag, we swam in the lake. But what was different was all of these teenagers came from conflict zones. And part of our goal was to bring people together to try to understand what were the roots of our problems, be it history, be it power, be it religion. As you see right here, this was an activity that we called the 13-legged race, much like the 3-legged race that you might be familiar with, but with more legs, as you can see. And the idea is to try to figure out how do we move forward together, encumbered as we were by our history, by our parents. What was amazing about this experience in my life was that this program deeply ingrained our humanity into every single thing we did. It was probably the only place I have ever been or lived where human dignity was at the center of everything we did. And it's a powerful experience to be in one of those environments because, you see, not only can we get along, we used to have an expression, make one friend from the other side, with this idea that if you just made one friend, perhaps that would get us a little bit closer to solving the conflict. It's powerful. It's powerful because we can solve hard problems when we treat each other with dignity. Now, at the time, the Middle East was in the process of a historic peace process. It's hard to remember now, but there was once a moment, And this, for everyone who's younger than 30, you probably don't remember this, but there was once a moment when peace was a realistic possibility. I had been so moved by the power of this organization and the work that we were doing that I went and I moved to the Middle East, based out of Jerusalem. And on the year anniversary of my time out there, the entire peace process fell apart. And they've been fighting basically nonstop ever since. One of our campers, a 17-year-old boy named Asil Asleh, was murdered by the police during that time period. Chased down after participating in a nonviolent protest, run into an olive field where he was shot in the back at close range. For me, this very much symbolized the death of hope. It symbolized how fragile peace was. The work that we had been doing, bringing people of all nationalities and religions across borders into each other's homes, into each other's schools, became impossible. And so I figured I had to come back to America and figure out what I would do next. And like many people with a college degree and very little direction, I went to law school. Now, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up at that time, I would have told you certainly not a lawyer and definitely not a prosecutor. I went to law school because I believed that law and the rule of law played an essential role in building peace, in protecting our countries and places from collapse. And I thought that maybe I could use these legal concepts to go back to the Middle East and help them build safe and democratic and healthy places. I'm still waiting to get that call to go back. But by the time I got to the end of my law school career, if you asked me what I wanted to be, I would have told you I wanted to be a program officer at the U.S. Department of State. If you asked me who I wanted to be, I would have told you I wanted to be the kind of person who helped fix broken places. So I got that job at the U.S. Department of State, and I spent a lot of time in places that had been broken. I worked with police officers and prosecutors and different places who were trying to rebuild their countries after devastating wars. And my biggest takeaway from that period in my life is that it's really easy to destroy. It's really hard to rebuild something better. And so we should keep this in mind. It's best not to destroy things when they are working. Now, my first job after law school was in Kosovo, where the U.S. government sent me out to try to help fix the justice system in Kosovo. And one day I was driving through the countryside with a senior colleague. He had been a federal prosecutor in Chicago. And he said to me, he says, "Kid," okay, he didn't say that part, but I always like telling the story a little bit better when he does. So he says, "Kid, you know, you're a smart guy, you study this stuff, but you have no practical experience. You've got good ideas, but you need to go do something first." He told me I needed to go work in the American criminal justice system. He told me I should be a prosecutor. Now, for those of you sitting in the room who are still not entirely sure what a prosecutor does and who have managed to get this far in life without ever seeing an episode of Law and Order, let me tell you this. In the American criminal justice system, the people are represented by two different but equally important groups: the police who investigate the crimes and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. These are their stories. Thum thum. I became a prosecutor. I was one of the people who went out and prosecuted the offenders. Now, when I was in law school, I never imagined doing this kind of job. I never imagined doing a job whose end game was to send people to prison. I had told my buddy, listen, if I'm going to go work in the criminal justice system, I'm going to go be a defender. I care about civil rights. That's what I want to do. And he looked at me and he said something that really transformed the next part of my career. He said, "If you really care about civil rights, then you definitely need to be a prosecutor, because they're the ones with all the power." And it was a profound shift to me, because it is true, prosecutors have an inordinate amount of power. They're the ones who decide what charges get filed. They're the ones who make the arguments about who should be incarcerated and for how long. They're the ones who decide who gets a second chance or who gets an alternative to prosecution, such as counseling or mental health treatment. And so I became a prosecutor and I began doing these cases in Washington, D.C. And as I was in the justice system of Washington, D.C., what I can tell you is it didn't look anything like on Law and Order. What I can tell you is there was a lot of poverty. There were a lot of people struggling with mental health challenges. There were an inordinate amount of people struggling with addiction. There were untold number of people who were damaged by trauma. And so I had to make decisions about what to do with those people. Who would be prosecuted? Who would go to jail? Who would get a second chance? And every day I would make these decisions, hundreds of decisions affecting people whose lives I knew nothing about. And I never got to know what happened, whether or not I made a good decision or a bad decision. I decided I didn't want to prosecute those kinds of cases. If I was going to use the power that I had, I wanted to do it on behalf of marginalized people, on behalf of people who didn't have that power for themselves. If you asked me what I wanted to do, I would have told you I wanted to be a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. If you asked me who I wanted to be, I would have told you I wanted to be someone who fought against injustice. Which brings me back to the thin brown file. I told you I'd get back to it. I know some of you guys were worried. Our job was to investigate police misconduct. It was our job to police the police. And I got assigned this case, and I got teamed up with a rookie FBI agent named Ashley Johnson. And together, we sought out to try to figure out what happened on Henry Glover's last day. Over the course of the next 18 months, we interviewed hundreds of people, including police officers and civilians. We tried to turn over every stone, find everything that we could. And let me tell you what we found. 4 days after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, Henry Glover and his family had realized that the city was not coming back, that it was time to actually pack up their family and leave. Though Henry, like many of the people who had remained in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, was among the poorest of New Orleans poor. He stole a truck in an attempt to get him and his family out of the city, stopped by a strip mall to pick up some items, and as he was leaving, heard a large booming voice from the second floor balcony of that strip mall. Him and his friend Bernard began to run away, at which point a shot rang out from the second floor balcony, hitting Henry in the back. Henry and his friend Bernard tried to find some help. They flagged down a Good Samaritan who was in the neighborhood named William Tanner, and William Tanner picked up Henry and tried to find him help. Now, the nearest hospital was too far away, but Tanner had believed that there would be some medical supplies and medical support at an elementary school nearby from where the shooting had taken place. But when the men arrived at that scene, they were removed from the car, handcuffed, assaulted by the police officers, and then sometime later, a police officer with road flares drove off with the car with Henry Glover's body, took it to a hidden levee, and lit the car on fire. For the next 4 years, it was completely covered up by the police department. That was until a young civil rights lawyer and his trusty FBI rookie agent sidekick went down to New Orleans to try to figure it out. We ultimately indicted 5 police officers with the shooting, with the burning of Henry Glover, and with the cover-up that followed. In my closing argument, I focused on the importance of the rule of law. I'd learned these things in working in war zones, and I emphasized how it is the rule of law that ultimately protects us from the worst of human impulses. If you want to know what happened, I suggest you buy the book because I'm not going to ruin the ending right now. But I want to tell you why I wrote this book. I mean, in part, the story itself was interesting. It was set in a dystopian hellscape of a city that had been destroyed, a city that many people, including those living in there, believed was never coming back. It involves a police force so notorious for its corruption and abuse that it is probably one of the worst that I have ever seen over the course of my career. And it involves a cast of characters so colorful that they could only come from New Orleans. It's a story about what happens when our institutions fail, of the grave harm that comes when we are unprepared for natural disasters, for what happens when we allow our public institutions to be corrupted. And it's the story and the power of individuals to do something about it. Because I can tell you, over the course of those hundreds of interviews, Ashley and I were lied to countless times. In fact, I don't know that I have ever had a case in the course of my career where I have been lied to as much as I did during the investigation of this case. But it's also the story and the power of the individuals who spoke up against that injustice. For we never would have been able to bring the charges. We never would have been able to uncover what happened to Henry Glover were it not for the few brave voices of people who spoke up, saw what they had seen, and said, "This cannot stand." In the aftermath of this case, the New Orleans Police Department underwent massive reforms in ways that had never been seen in the history of America. Over 25 police officers were fired, and major changes were made to the institution itself and how it did everything from use of force to training to overtime. And I can tell you that today, the New Orleans Police Department is a dramatically better police department than it was back in 2009 when I first came across it. Now, 10 years later, I got another phone call, this time from a prosecutor in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, I had met her back in 2015. In 2015, Walter Scott was stopped for having a broken taillight. Less than 2 minutes later, a North Charleston police officer named Michael Slager fired 8 shots at at Walter Scott as he ran away, even though he was unarmed and posed no danger. The whole thing was captured on video by a barber who just happened to be walking in the neighborhood, felt like something wasn't right, pulled out his cell phone and recorded the video. That was the most dramatic video of a bad police shooting that I had ever seen. Now, notwithstanding that video, a jury in South Carolina hung, unable to figure out what to do about the officer who killed Walter Scott. The city was incredibly tense at that time. Lots of people worried that it was about to have its own Ferguson moment. But Walter Scott's family got up, said to the community, "Have faith in the system. The feds are coming." I was the feds. And I can tell you it was a lot of pressure. Now, ultimately, we convicted the police officer who murdered Walter Scott. He was given one of the largest sentences ever given to a police officer for killing a civilian. And as I stood on the courtroom steps after that verdict, let me tell you what I felt. Let me tell you what I wanted to feel. What I wanted to feel was justice. You see, for those of you who have never felt justice, justice is a feeling. It was a feeling that I got when 10 victims of a sex trafficking case I prosecuted walked into a bank and opened up their very first accounts ever, depositing the money we had won them for restitution so they could finally start their lives and take back their future. Justice was when an entire community came together to speak against the officers that had been terrorizing their community and finally watch that abuse stop. And I had felt justice in a hate crimes case, a man who had been brutally tortured, when he got to face down the people who did it to him, and he said, "Your hate will not define me." That was justice. But as I stood on the courthouse steps that day, I felt empty. Perhaps it was the aftermath of 14 years of doing this job. One grows a little jaded and disheartened. Part of it was knowing that no matter what verdict we got, Walter Scott wasn't coming back. Part of it was knowing that in the 2.5 years it took to investigate and prosecute that case, over 2,500 other people had been killed in interactions with the police. And I also knew that no matter what, the next day, the same policies, procedures, systems, all of which contributed in their own ways to Walter Scott's death, were still going to be in place. And so when you feel like that, after what is arguably the biggest victory of your career, it's time to get a new job. These were the feelings that I was having when I got a call from Scarlett Wilson down in Charleston, South Carolina. She was having similar feelings. She had worked on the state case, and she called me up, and she wanted to know, are we being fair? Are we, the prosecutors in Charleston, South Carolina, are we being fair and effective, utilizing that power that we have as the most powerful actors in the room? This cut to the heart of why I wanted to be a prosecutor. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to make sure that the people that were coming into contact with our system were treated fairly, but I also wanted us to be effective. I mean, our criminal justice system plays a role in keeping our communities safe. It plays a role in accountability, but it's hard because the thing about our criminal justice system is that it wasn't actually designed for justice. It was designed for punishment. And if I've learned anything over the last 25 years, it's that we should never confuse punishment for justice. We should never confuse punishment for accountability. And we certainly should not confuse punishment for public safety. Now, I promised you that I would talk about what it's going to take to fix our communities. So I'm going to start perhaps with a definition. There's one friend of mine who likes to say community is everything that happens within 15 kilometers of your house. For those of you who are not familiar with the metric system, that's 9.321 miles in case you need to map it out later. I think proximity is important, certainly. But for the purpose of this talk, I want to talk about communities of purpose. People together who are organized to achieve some sort of purpose. Now, how many of you are part of a community? How many are you part of multiple communities? How many of you would have a hard time defining what the purpose of that community is? When Scarlett said she wanted to be fair and effective, she had a very clear idea in her mind what her purpose was. And she wanted to use data to try to figure out if she was being fair and effective. She asked me, do you think we can use data to figure out if we're being fair and effective? And I said, I have no idea, but I sure want to try to help you. There was just one problem. I didn't know anything about data. I had read Moneyball. For those of you who have read Moneyball, it's the story of a mid-market baseball team who was losing before they turned to data analytics to eventually get to the championship. And I thought, wow, if the Oakland A's can use data analytics to win baseball games, then maybe we can do the same thing to make our system more fair and effective. But I wasn't about to get up to speed that fast, so I had to bring together a team of people with the skill sets needed to do it. I hired a bunch of data scientists and data engineers and visualizers and former law enforcement and members of the community because it became clear to me if we were going to try to fix hard problems, we needed a lot more different skill sets and perspectives than were currently being used to address these problems. So what did I learn? I learned that data is actually not all that complicated. Data is counting. That's all that it is about. But what I have learned is in order to be effective, you got to trust your numbers. And it only matters if we're counting the right things. So I want to talk about counting the wrong things, because the first time I was exposed to data, I was at the US Department of State. We were working on rebuilding Iraq after the war. Our task was to reestablish the rule of law in post-war Iraq. Anyone want to take a guess at what our key metric was? Stumper, yeah. It was the number of courthouses we had built, which I get from some of the remarks, you guys agree, is not necessarily the best metric for establishing whether or not we have established the rule of law. Well, for prosecutors, for the longest time, we use two metrics, which is the number of people that we convict and how long we sentence to prison for, which I was becoming to realize are also not that helpful in actually establishing whether or not we had established justice. Now, if you were given this authority, if someone gave you all of the data of every decision that prosecutors had made over the last 5 years with the question about are we being fair and effective, what would you count? Anyone have something they want to count? Recidivism, whether or not people have gone through our system, whether or not they come back. It's a good count of whether or not we're being effective. How many wrongfully convicted people are in our system? Certainly not fair. I mean, the reality is we could count anything. You know, a lot of the prosecutors that I talk to say that the reason they do this work is because they care about victims. We could ask victims what they think, because when we do, what we know is they are unhappy with the current system. We know that about 60% of victims of violent crime don't even report their victimization to law enforcement. They have that little trust in our system as an avenue for justice. We could count whether or not the things that we really care about, like homicides, whether or not we're solving them. I mean, if you care about non-fatal shootings, if you care about armed carjackings, I hate to break it to you, it's even worse. We could count the number of people who are coming into our system for their problems. We could count the number of years we're sentencing people to for incarceration every single year. Add it all up. I can tell you, it's a lot of people. In one small jurisdiction we worked at, they were sentencing people to 4,000 years per year. That is not the state. That is just one city of 600,000 people. And from a sure human toll, it's pretty bad. But when you actually think about it from a cost perspective, it's costing that jurisdiction $160 million in future commitments. Well, we see how much it costs in various different states. Pennsylvania is about $67,000. Unless you think that those years are all from the homicides and rapes that you saw on Law & Order, it's not. When you add up the 5-day sentences and the 10-day sentences and the 5-year sentences, you get a pretty big number. And what was interesting when we did this technique, you see, we asked the prosecutors to rank what they thought was the most important thing, all the way down to the least important things. And what you see is some of these things, like possession of small amounts of drugs, were costing the city $3 to $6 million a year just in incarceration. That's not policing. That's not court costs. So the other thing that we found was that 1 in 4 people who were coming in the system were ultimately having their cases dismissed for insufficient evidence. Because when we have a high volume of cases being funneled through the system, you get it wrong a lot. And they were finding about 25% of the time. But not only was it taking 25% of their cases, it was taking them over 200 days before they figured this out. An inordinate amount of cost, also costing their communities from being able to focus on the things they really cared about, like the murders and the rapes. So a key part of fixing our communities, I think, is that we need to count the right thing. But once you've figured out that you don't like how you're doing, what do you do next? Step 3, deconstruct the system. I really like systems thinking because what I've found is it gives people new words to talk about problems in a way that ratchets down the tension and leads us a little more to getting solutions. So what is a system? A system is an interconnected set of elements organized to achieve a purpose. And I know there's some of you thinking, that sounds a lot like his definition of community. You're right. Good job. Good job for those of you who said that. A system is an interconnected set of elements organized to achieve a purpose. And I think when we think about what we can learn in systems thinking, it also helps us to fix our own communities. There's a saying that systems are perfectly designed to achieve the result they're currently achieving. So if you do not like your results, you should do something different. But it's not just the system itself. Systems function on the interconnectedness of people and relationships. And so what is systems thinking? It's about understanding the different parts of the system so that we can actually get the outcomes that we want. Now, how have we used this in a place like Charleston? I know I'm getting close to time. I want to leave time for questions, so I'm going to kind of speed through a little bit. But has anyone ever taken a bath? All right, I know a few of you have. You know how it works. You turn on the hot, you turn on the cold, you try to get a perfect amount. If you think about the case backlogs that are facing a lot of our justice systems, that are keeping people from having speedy resolution of their cases, we use this to sort of talk through. Our criminal justice system, it's got inputs. We got good cases, we got bad cases. We get rid of cases by having trials and pleas and diversions and other alternatives. What was happening in Charleston was that they were bringing in way more cases than they were resolving. And to take it to...
And I can't friggin' stop it. Oh my...
I mean, this is what was happening in Charleston, but it's happening in jurisdictions all across America. We are overflowing with cases, many of those bad cases, many of those things that are not priorities, many of things that could be fixed by way more cost-effective choices like counseling and addiction treatment. Well, when you've deconstructed your system, what do you do next? We take a hypothesis mindset. What's a hypothesis? I know we got some scientists in the room here, but for those of us who haven't taken science since 7th grade with Mrs. Rivlin, a hypothesis is an idea that can be tested. And so what's great about hypotheses is that everyone can bring their hypothesis to the table. It meant people on the right, on the left, in the middle, lots of crazy ideas, lots of good ideas, and then we used their numbers to try to figure out who was right. And what happened was everyone was usually a little bit right. And we could learn from that and begin fixing things. They had a hypothesis that they could move an attorney from the end of the system to the front of the system, whose job it was just to make sure that bad cases were being addressed and removed early. It was not rocket science. But what happened? They totally reversed their backlog problem. They were able to get rid of bad cases. They saved thousands of hours of time. They saved thousands of days of unnecessary incarceration. And by our quick estimate, for the point that my numbers people will allow me to say publicly, hundreds of thousands of dollars saved, way more than the cost of the staffing changes that we made in order to get there. South Carolina's biggest newspaper called it a common sense. We can't believe this isn't being done already. Well, I can tell you why it's not being done already. It's because the status quo is a powerful enemy. It is easy to get stuck with inertia. It is easy to get stuck in the way that we always did things. But how did we really achieve what we achieved? I think this is one of the most radical parts of the Justice Innovation Lab approach, is that we meet people where they're at. We work in, right now, 8 jurisdictions across America, Republican jurisdictions, Democratic, North, South, East, West. And we go there and we listen to people. This is one of my favorite quotes. Who is wise? The person who learns from all people. Or one of Asil's favorite quotes from the Sufi poet Rumi. We need to find that space where we can make one friend. We need to find that space where we can learn from people with different ideas than ours. And we need to be able to share our hypotheses with each other. Because when we do, We just started this not that long ago. 1,000 people are now out of the system who would otherwise be stuck there. And every single day that number is getting bigger because we didn't just put a Band-Aid on it. We changed the system and we changed the structures and how they operated. So as you think about your communities that you care about, well, first of all, figure out who you want to be when you grow up because it makes it easier to understand what your purpose is. Count the right things. Map out your systems. Take a hypothesis mindset and listen to other people and meet them where they're at. If you want to learn more about the work that we do at Justice Innovation Lab, you can follow us in various different socials. If you want to find out what happened in the end, I recommend buying Fire on the Levee. Bookstore's got a lot of copies. I'll stay after to sign some if you want. Our philosophy at Justice Innovation Lab is to understand the world as it is, imagine it how it could be, and then do justice. So whatever communities you are a part of, understand what's happening, imagine a better future, and then do something about it. Thank you.